Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Sam Sugar. We are recording a victim video today, and this one is a little bit different from the typical victim videos that we do because this one does not even get into the issue of guardianship abuse. It gets into the issue of power of attorney abuse. And so I'd like to begin by introducing Jenna, who's on with us. Jenna, good morning, and let's hear your story.
I'm sorry, my name is June, but we're on my daughter's computer.
Okay, June, I'm sorry. Let's begin. Go ahead.
Okay, so um, I moved to South Florida to be close to my mom when it was clear that she was starting to struggle with um, just normal independence tasks. We went to the lengths of putting a power of attorney in place that her and I typed up together and printed and took to the bank to have notarized. It was a short 2-paragraph power of attorney, just in case I needed it for anything. I had medical power of attorney. And at the time, we were basically going to her house 2-3 times a day, cooking for her, taking her wherever she wanted to go. She swam 2 miles a day at the wellness center, so I would take her there. And she was basically very physically fit. She was just having a lot of what she called foggy moments, where she would be at the kitchen table trying to make a list for the grocery store for.
So she was declining in her cognition, and this was in 2010?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then what happened?
Well, she actually had surgery in May 2010, and it was supposed to be a real short, easy 2 to 3 week recovery. It was not. It actually was a very extensive uh, recovery that took months. And at that point, she started to get quite depressed. She was not able to get back in the pool yet. She was having trouble balance, which had not been a problem for her. So, along with her cognitive decline, she was also having a physical decline that was really taking the wind out of all of her sails. So, in October 2010, my daughter caught her stockpiling a bunch of pills and talking about suicide. That evening, my daughter called me from my mom's house and was telling me about it. And my mother overheard her, locked herself in the bathroom with the pills, and um, my daughter called 911. And when the cops came out, they went in, spoke to my mother. They had us step outside. I told them I was very concerned, did not want to leave her. They said she was calm, go home, give her some space, call her tomorrow. I said, no, I'm not going anywhere. But when the cops tell you you have to leave, you have to leave. So at that point, reluctantly, we went home. The next morning, I got up, I made her breakfast, went over, knocked on the door. She wouldn't answer. I left it on the porch that evening, left dinner for the next couple of days. And then within a few weeks, it became very clear that my mother was no longer at her home. There was things off of her front porch missing and gone, and cigarette butts all over the ground. So we called 911. The cops came out. I went around to the back of the house, which we had normally had all locked up, and there were people in it. There was no furniture, but there were people in it, and They said they rented it from someone named Miss Julia. And when the cops came there, we spoke to them. I told them this is my mother's house.
So if I can interrupt you, where did your mother go at that time?
She had been taken actually by, she had answered a handyman ad on Craigslist and went missing. And apparently, at the time, we did not know this, but this Miss Julia was a woman who lives off of senior citizens
In
for,
other words, this Miss Julia is a professional scammer.
yes.
Okay, fast forward to when you were able to locate your mother.
Well, when we located my mother, the cops went out in up in New York. They went out to the residence that we found that was purchased in my mother's name for $250,000 cash, and the very same day it was deeded over to this woman for $1.
So your mother became a victim of a professional abuser of vulnerable seniors, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Now, what I want to do, because that's horrible, obviously, in a few short words, were the police able to help you in any way?
Not in any way. It's mind-boggling to me how,
So they were consistent in their approach that this is a civil matter.
yes.
Now, what our viewers need to understand that this is precisely what victims of guardianship are told when guardianship abuse takes place and someone complains about it. They say, "I'm sorry, we can't help you. There has been no crime committed, and in this particular arena of law enforcement, this is a civil matter. So go in front of a judge, hire a lawyer for a lot of money, and you'll see what the system says for you. In the meantime, nobody's helping you and nobody's helping your mother." Is
That
that the
can,
way this went down?
yeah, and that cannot be the remedy for remedy for elder fraud. Cannot be throwing more money at the system when victims of elder fraud pretty much are left with nothing.
And in
Zero.
your mother's case, that's what happened. You have told me off air that your mother's estate was worth more than $1 million, maybe even $2 million. And I would have to assume it's disappeared, correct?
There's property that's been purchased, different pieces of property and whatnot, but unfortunately, that's why you can't find an attorney to take this kind of case on contingency or even, pro bono, because people who commit fraud are big on consumables, and they like to, for instance, right after my mother passed and they filed a will saying that my mother's estate was down to $0 to $10,000. A week after that, they went to Trump Tower and spent Christmas in 2014. So they like to take a lot of trips. They like
Yeah,
to
they do what most criminals do without a conscience. They believe that they have the right to other people's hard-earned money. Now, I want to shift for a second. You hired attorneys, correct?
yes, we did.
And what did they do for you over the course? I guess it's been 10 years, right?
They've actually done nothing because immediately upon finding out that the people who took my mother are from New York. They actually committed crimes up in New York that they were running from, which was why they were down here in Florida. They've actually, the wife of the couple was actually arrested by the very same police department that said my mother was with her friend, Miss Julia. They arrested Julia for 10 counts of fraud and embezzlement in 2001, which was 9 years before my mother ever met her. So it seems to me like the Cape Coral Police Department should have done some bit of background on whoever this new person who was now in control of my mother's quite extensive estate, you know, because if they had, they would have found out that she was, they knew her, they were familiar with her.
Right. So you had a situation where your dear mother, who was becoming incapacitated or demented at the very least, was being taken advantage of by known criminals who eventually wound up consuming her entire lifelong savings and estate. And you asked for help from the police and didn't get it. You hired attorneys, a large law firm, I understand,
Yes.
and got no assistance from them. You were told that it's a civil matter, and you went to the civil remediation, which is attorneys, who did nothing for you.
We
Now
went
let's
we
go ahead.
went to the head of the Lee County Economic Crimes Unit because I knew, just as anybody would know, that whoever this lady, Miss Julia, was, she was a scammer and taking advantage of my mother's money. I knew she was being fleeced, and I knew if the police would just look at her accounts, that it would be completely evident. But they refused. They said that it's a he said, she said, and that they spoke to my mother on the phone and that she says she's fine and she doesn't want anything to do with her family anymore because they just want her money. And I specifically said to the head of the Lee County Economic Crimes Unit, please investigate me, but please investigate my mother's entire finances when I was in control and when they were became in control. Please investigate this power of attorney, anything. And they basically said it's a he said, she said civil matter. So that can't be, because the Florida Constitution, the first articles of the Florida Constitution say you have the right to be heard. They do not want to hear any of the facts. They do not want to see any of the evidence. They don't want to see.
Unless the case winds up in a probate guardianship court, in which case that $2 million would not have gone to Ms. Julia and her associates, but would have gone to the lawyers in your county
Exactly.
who would bill your mother's estate till it was gone
Exactly.
if they had put her in a guardianship. And what this case, and the reason I wanted to display this case, is that elderly people in certain states, particularly Florida, California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, the hotspot states, suffer not only from too much interference from the courts and law enforcement, but also too little. And the point
Exactly.
is, unless the courts and the lawyers and the court insiders profit from someone's misery or disenfranchisement or incapacity or being Baker acted, unless they profit from it, they have no interest whatsoever
Game.
in
Exactly.
helping. And that's a really sad state of affairs. So let's fast forward now to 2020. What is the status of all of this? Your mother's been gone for a long time.
Well, the beauty of this is that I'm like a rabid dog. I can't seem to give it up. Um, it's every single thing reminds me of my mother. She grew up in an orphanage and made us promise she would never end up in a home. And after they robbed her blind and made sure she had nothing left, they dumped her in a home in upstate New York as indigent and abandoned by her family, where she died alone. And the grown daughter of this couple who does this for a living Um, she actually lived at home when they did this to my mom, and she lived in the household where my mom was isolated, taken advantage of, and she's a firsthand witness. She's gone to the FBI. She took a stack of evidence into the Syracuse FBI office, and they refused to speak to her. They said that you just can't walk in off the street and speak to an agent. That's not how it works. She left a name and number. They never called her back. I called incessantly until I was told to stop calling. I went to, I've done a lot of, I've gone to everyone. This state attorney.
And like victims of guardianship, there is no one to go to.
You would think, I thought, in the beginning, I thought I'm going to find a lawyer who has a mom who I thought I'd find somebody. I found no one. I even looked up law enforcement officials in New York that have, been commended for, going above and beyond for elder, abuse, or like I have just gone. I have tracked back victims. These people did this to a World War II veteran in 1990. So, and this woman is barely older. She's like 4 years older than me. So, and I'm still paying on my student loans from those days, so there is a lot to be said for the fact that we are here in Florida, and Florida specifically is being overrun by fraud in all sorts of ways. And there is no protection whatsoever for senior citizens. And let's face it, once you're over 70, I mean, I'm 53 and at times I need my family, need help from my family. So by the time you're 70, you're vulnerable in a number of ways. And it's just not fair that the citizens of Florida are not being protected. My mother, I don't even know where her remains are. I have uncovered a check that was written on a closed account for my mother's cremation. So the check bounced. I also have letters from the Social Security Administration where after my mother passed, they were not notified, so they continued to pay her Social Security. It went into account that she had a joint account she held with this Miss Julia. And the letter from the Social Security Administration says when they found out that she was passed, they tried to go back and take the money, and the money was gone and the accounts were closed. So,
what you're saying resonates so much in that every abuse, including Social Security diversion and the seizure of property and the restriction of visitation and the use of senior warehousing facilities, every single one of these abuses that we see in guardianship all the time, especially in places like Florida, happen outside of guardianship. The only difference is that instead of a judge running the scam, it's a criminal non-judge running the scam. But the techniques are exactly the same, and the outcome is exactly the same. And for our viewers, the takeaway here is exactly what you've said. Seniors are incredibly vulnerable and at risk, no matter what happens, whether their family takes care of them or not. Anytime a senior becomes vulnerable by a physical disability or a mental decline, there are vultures out there whose life's work revolves around sucking an estate dry, whether it's through the courts or without a lawyer or with a lawyer, with a judge, without a judge, with a Baker Act, without a Baker Act. The tactics are the same. The
Anyone vulnerable.
perpetrators differ. I want to thank you very much, Julia, for sharing your story with us today. And I'm hopeful that those people watching this story will take the takeaway, which is if you have parents that are still alive and you love them, you've got to be very, very careful to watch over them and protect them from both types of all types of abuse, because we live in a system today where there just isn't any help available for people who want to protect the elderly. Thank you.
You know,